Hey, everybody. Welcome to Jets Talk Now. I'm Paul Fiore. Appreciate you all tuning in. Please click like and subscribe. Today is Tuesday, January 27th. Wanted to touch base with everyone, as the Jets offseason continues to unfold. I'm probably doing a lot less in way of videos during the offseason, unless either there's breaking news or there's a busy week of content. So probably do about 2 videos or so a week. Right now, one of the things that I think is the most pressing, and it's weird, right? Because the Jets coaching search is ongoing. And I think on Friday, we had the breaking news that the Jets had let go of, I believe, 7 coaches in total. 6 or 7 coaches in total, and the assumed demotion of Tanner Engstrand. I know that's just been reported. The Jets haven't said anything about it, but this has been reported by, I think, at least 4 or 5 major media sources, aside from even local beat reporters. So regardless of how you feel, and I know the Jet fan base is highly divided about local beat reporters and their sources, it seems pretty clear that Tanner Engstrand's getting demoted. So you have his demotion, you have multiple defensive staff members fired, which falls behind, obviously the initial Steve Wilkes firing. And, so as of Friday evening, I had been pretty positive about the vast majority of these decisions. I was a little bit unsure about the Engstrand decision. I wanted to see how this would play out. I still do. But he was the one coach of the coaches, aside from Banjo, who I thought did a great job. He was the one coach that I was kind of good with keeping at a major level, right? I mean, I'm obviously offensive line coach did a good job, but other than him, other than that, I looked at him as kind of an incomplete. I just think it's impossible to truly grade his performance as offensive coordinator when you look at what he had to work with this year. His entire receiving core by the end of the season were guys that were not part of the team at the beginning of the year. Garrett Wilson didn't play for how many games towards the end of the season? Justin Fields was a disaster. And then Brady Cook started the last, 5 weeks? How do you grade that? There are advanced metrics that showed he was scheming guys wide open, and then the quarterbacks weren't getting them the ball. So I thought there were flashes there, and so I gave him an incomplete and assumed he would get a second season as the play caller. And young guy who's figuring it out. I was kind of looking forward to what that might look like. So I was surprised by it, but again, I think I said on Friday, and I'm going to hold true to this. I give an A for recognition and execution on moving forward with getting rid of people that did not do a good job as a coach. So Glenn deserves, and again, credits as a tough word because these were his hires, but I think he deserves some level of credit for recognizing change needed to happen. But it's a 2-part process, and the 2-part process is, now that you made these decisions, what follows? And while nothing is actually concrete happened yet, and I think I want to emphasize that, there is a lot of swirl going on right now in general around the Jets and their coaching searches. And names have been kind of bandied about, some more than others. And I guess your feelings on this as a fan depend upon your belief in what the media is reporting. And some people who are very pro Glenn are very skeptical of this reporting. And so I understand that. I mean, they've gotten things wrong. And they're also looking for reasons to stay positive. And I appreciate that too. I've said this over and over again. I'm going to try to judge the man based on his performance and not based on any perceived, beliefs that he is or isn't capable of the job. I think he was hired for a reason. We can disagree about the reasons why he was hired, but at the end of the day, if he does a great job, then he's worthy of being a long-term head coach. If he does a bad job, then he needs to move on. But what I am kind of picking through the scraps of information that we gather that is not from the Jets themselves is a coaching search that is at best scattered and at worst not in sync with a real plan, and that might be for multiple reasons. Fair or not, Aaron Glenn won 3 games. He fired nearly 50% of his staff, and he's going into a second season with no clear path to a QB1, no word at all from the owner post end of season that would suggest he is anything but on a moderately warm to hot seat. And so when you think of candidates that are available, when you look at the list of 8 names that were presented, really the 3 names that excited me were not one of them, which was not Wink Martindale, were Banda, Jones, and Leonard, mainly because all 3 have good resumes. All 3 have worked for very strong defensive coordinators, and all 3 have done really good things in their careers. Leonard specifically in his previous stint as DC in Wisconsin. And so when those 3 names popped up on the 8 that they interviewed, it's like, okay, there's a level of hope. The thing that was concerning, though, was those were all virtual interviews. And Wink Martindale was on that list. And again, not to disparage Wink, because his resume is 1,000 times better than Steve Wilkes. Wink is someone who's out of the league and not in demand. He's in his 60s. And again, age is not the issue as much as what I'm saying is when someone's in their 60s and they're out of the league and you're not getting a phone call, the job might be more appealing to you than someone else. You might not be as worried about Aaron Glenn and whether he's on the hot seat or not. And so, over the last couple of weeks, it feels like Wink's camp has really pushed this narrative that he's the guy. Now, we don't know, but just it seems like the media is reporting only Wink information and not much else. I think they did report Chris Harris had a second interview. But, that we knew Wink was there on Saturday, and some people were expecting a deal to be done within 24 hours. And then the next thing you know, here we are today on Tuesday, no deal in place, and now reporting, and again, who's this coming from? But reporting that suggests they're trying to work through things, but there's more sense around the league that Aaron Glenn is contemplating being the play caller and bringing in a younger defensive coordinator. Now, if you think about that, if you're Jim Leonard, you're not going to take that job. Like, you're not going to be the DC in name only, not when you're going to have the opportunity to be DC and call plays and you're a hot candidate. You're not. If you're Jones, he took another job, so he's out now. Banda, maybe he would consider that, but we haven't heard anything since his first interview. Doesn't mean he hasn't had a second or won't have a second, but we haven't heard anything. Wink certainly won't do that. So it leads me to believe, as has been speculated online, that there's a much better chance today than there was maybe Saturday that Chris Harris gets the DC title while Aaron Glenn calls plays. Okay, so let's put that aside in its own little bucket for defense, because we're going to get back to that. On the offensive side of the ball, a name emerged over the weekend from Connor Hughes. And everyone originally kind of jumped on this and said, Connor doesn't have sources. And I don't believe that to be true. I do think that sometimes it's not about Connor, but sometimes he can be a little bit too much. But he reported Frank Reich was a name that had been brought up and was in discussions with the Jets. You heard on WFAN yesterday from Boomer, who is best friends with Frank Reich, that was a true story. and that they are working through these things. And then Connor yesterday, I think, said he believed this was going to get done. Frank Reich has a very long resume in the NFL, previously a backup quarterback, defensive coordinator in Philly when they won the Super Bowl, which he did not call plays, but he was the DC. Head coach at Indianapolis for a number of years, coached many different quarterbacks every year because they kind of went through what the Jets go through, except at a better level of talent when they keep replacing the quarterback. I think mainly the big one was Andrew Luck deciding to retire, really kind of put a wrench in that. But, if you look at his stats as a play caller in Indy, he had a couple of good years. And then he went to Carolina and it was an abject failure, complete disaster, fired him before the season ended. Since then, he's been out of the NFL for 3 years now, working at Stanford as an advisor, interim head coach. Another guy, kind of older. Now, if you listen to Boomer, he says he's been getting opportunities. I would imagine a lot of that has to be in advisor roles. But who knows? I don't know anything. Anyway, it sounds like the conversation around Reich would be him becoming the play caller with Tanner staying on staff in an undefined role, but still maybe as OC in name, because then they can bring in Reich and they don't have to go through an entire process. And that's not because they want to skirt the Rooney Rule. It's a silly thing to say that a minority head coach wants to skirt the Rooney Rule. So that's not what I'm saying, but we're very late stage, right? Jobs are being filled. I believe there's only 4 head coach openings left. All these teams are going to be hiring staff. The Jets, if they're going to make these changes, have to move fast. They're not the most desirable job. They don't have a quarterback. So if Frank Reich is the guy, they probably bring him as a senior offensive assistant with play calling responsibilities. Maybe Tanner's the passing game coordinator. Maybe Reich has QB coach as well. But there's a lot there. Now, if Frank Reich was coming in as a senior advisor and QB coach, I'd feel really good about that, actually, because he's got a good resume when it comes to QBs. And I'd love somebody who's senior on the staff who's developed quarterbacks before to be part of the Jets. So I would feel good about that. I would feel good about him being in the room with Tanner, talking about game plan, talking about game calling in general and the decisions that you make. Because, I said this on Friday, I thought Tanner schemed a lot of really interesting things. I thought he was very creative, but I thought there was inconsistency in how he called a game in general, abandoning the run at times. Some of his fourth down play decisions were pretty bad. So I think that's normal. He's a young guy. He's figuring it out. Bringing in someone like Reich, maybe he could create some cohesiveness with the game plan and the strategy. And how much of it was because the quarterback was bad or not, it's unknown to me. I think it was pretty bad. So the Frank Reich thing, if he becomes the guy, and Connor said yesterday he thinks it's going to get done, I'd feel really good about him just being the guy coming in to be the advisor, senior assistant with QB coach responsibilities. And reading the tea leaves on this, why would Frank Reich take this job if the Jets didn't tell him they're going to draft a young quarterback? There's no reason why he would come in and take this. He doesn't need the job. Like, I believe he's still getting paid by Carolina, if I remember what Boomer said yesterday. So he doesn't need the job. So the only reason you take it is if you think you have the opportunity to work with a young quarterback. Who that young quarterback might be, we can all speculate. I put a tweet out yesterday that got a lot of hits and, some ridicule, and that's fine. I think the Jets are going to take a big swing at Mendoza. I really and truly do. Now, they may strike out. They may get never picked up the phone by the Raiders. But I have a hard time believing it's like, some 4th round swing. Maybe it's Ty Simpson. I hope it's not. I don't think Ty Simpson's worthy of a 16th pick in the draft personally. But reading the tea leaves on all of this, I look at it and go, all right, you bring in Frank Reich, you're going to have a young quarterback for him to work with. It's not a terrible thing. So I'm okay with bringing in Reich. I don't want him having play calling responsibilities, but maybe that's what you need to do to get him the job. I just feel like today, with the idea that now maybe Chris Harris becomes the DC, Glenn is the play caller, Frank Reich comes in, We don't really have a path to a QB. All of a sudden, Wink Martindale's potentially out of the picture. This feels very disconnected. Now, maybe that's unfair. Maybe this is just a process that's getting messy because of a few reasons. The Jets are being quiet, so people are speculating. That could be one. Number two, maybe it's as simple as the Jets job is not appealing in general, and this is what happens. Or number three, and I think there's a good chance of this potentially, Woody's gotten involved. In what way did Woody potentially get involved? Well, this could be very similar to what happened to Robert Saleh at the end of year 3, where he was no longer allowed to spend money on bringing in people, right? The coaching staff stayed stagnant from year 3 into year 4. He kept everyone in place and then fired Saleh famously after 5 games. But when you heard some of the reporting, Woody was not trusting of that regime any longer and pretty much put the handcuffs on them. So the Jets win 3 games. He sees all the noise. He sees the results. Rich Cimini reported he was pissed off at the end of the year. The Giants go get Harbaugh. The Jets don't have a path to QB1 right now. All the headlines are negative. I could see Woody going to Glenn, look, you can bring in people. I ain't going to pay a bunch of money for these people. Like, sorry. They're not getting 3-year, 4-year, 5-year deals. I'm willing to give people 1-year deals. And maybe Frank Reich is willing to take a 1-year deal, right? Like maybe he is. Maybe it's looking at it like, it's a consulting gig. I'm still getting paid. Not a consulting gig, but it's a 1-year gig. If it fails, no one's going to blame me. I could still go back and do something different. I've got the resume. This would be a blip on my resume. Like people look at Saleh really after 3+ years, they're giving him a second chance because they view the Jets job, fair or not, that it was a blip. I don't believe that, true, but people are doing that. Freaking Joe Douglas is getting interviews for GM jobs. It's crazy to me. But Frank Reich might look at it differently. Wink Martindale might be looking at this is my last chance to be a DC, my last chance for a big payday in the NFL. I want a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal. And the Jets, Woody's like, no. Not doing it. You figure it out, AG. I could see that. How could you not as a fan? Just like I could see Woody being impatient and telling his GM, I want Mendoza, go get him. I want headlines, make it happen. I want to sell jerseys, do it. I could see these. If you're a Jet fan for any number of years and you don't see that possibility, then you're not paying attention. The Jets for 15 years have been terrible because it starts from the top. Now, is it a bad idea to go get Mendoza? Not just the idea of it, but how much would it cost you is potentially a bad idea. You don't know that yet because this is way too soon, but that could be a bad idea. What would be worse is he goes and makes a trade for a veteran who's not very good and uses 2027 assets to do that. That would really be bad. Right? And this is the risk of bringing back a regime if the owner is not trusting of them. And I said this at the end of the year. Woody needed to put out a statement that we were bringing these guys back and that he had trust in them. Because every single person around the league is seeing how the Jets are operating right now, and it comes off as chaotic. It comes off as unsure. It comes off as an owner who might not believe in the coach. As fans, you can feel differently. There are fans who argue with me all the time that we think the seat's hot and it's not. You can't go and fire 40+% of your staff, win 3 games, have no path to a QB, potentially now take over DC roles as a play caller and not have a hot seat. I'm sorry. Like if objectively you feel his seat is not hot from all of what I just laid out to you, then you are the pro AG blinders on fan. No different than the blinders on anti-AG fan that will say everything negative about the man and not give him 1 ounce of credit for anything that he ever will do. Again, I have said this over and over again. I'm not pro or anti-AG. I'm pro Jets. And like I'm over watching bad football. But objectively speaking right now, if what we go into 2026 with is Aaron Glenn calling plays, Chris Harris somehow gets to stay on as DC, even though he was responsible for the defensive backs and they got not one interception this year. It's kind of nuts. And Frank Reich is the play caller with Tanner as an undefined role yet. Unless you get lucky and hit on the quarterback, and they could, and by the way, the schedule, which is a bear, I'm expecting a very similar season in 26 than we got in 25. I really am. Like, what makes me believe Aaron Glenn can both call plays and be head coach? You know, I made this comparison. Jeff Ulbrich took over as interim head coach and still maintained his DC roles. He was way in over his head. Yes, it was during the season. Yes, he took over something during the year, which was very challenging. Aaron Glenn last year looked over his head in the games as a head coach. He was objectively a bad head coach last year. You can say what you want. I believe he was a bad head coach last year. I thought his game decisions were bad. I thought the way he managed the last 2 minutes of a half was really bad. I think that he didn't seem to have his team prepared on a weekly basis. I think he did a lot of things that just did not instill a lot of confidence in me as head coach. Okay. Now he's going to take on play calling responsibilities when he clearly came in here saying he had no desire to do that. Like, he came in here with the intent to be a CEO coach. Now he's going to take over the role of game calling at the DC side. I just don't believe that that's going to be a result that's going to be positive. I don't. Now, people will say maybe he wants to go out on his own accord and fall on the sword on his own. That's fine. But all that means is we're going to be watching bad football again in 2026. And you see it online all over the place. Even people who are not anti-Glenn. Well, I guess we just need to look forward to 2027. That's how people feel right now. And then there are fans that get mad. Sorry, I had an itch on my eye. There are fans that get mad at other fans saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And you don't give him a chance. And well, that's not fair. I mean, I'm sitting here objectively saying, I see a 3-win season. I mean, yeah, they got to build the roster and all that good stuff. But it's hard to see light at the end of this tunnel right now and think that this man's going to be head coach after year 2. And so if they're going to be bad again, do you want them to make sure that they're really bad so you do get the franchise quarterback with one of your 3 first-round picks next year, whether Indy's really terrible or not? We don't know. Dallas probably won't be bad enough to be that pick, but the Jets are likely the worst of those 3 teams. I feel like you want, in a way, either for them to get lucky and hit on the QB this year and have a path forward that's going to get them to 7 wins and you have an answer at quarterback, or you want them to be god-awful. Like, if you're just in QB purgatory forever, you know, you'll have the quarterback position treated as if he's the 53rd man on a roster, where you're changing it every year. Like, it's crazy how often the Jets change quarterbacks. It's the most important position in the game. Yeah, you have to build a roster around them, but if you don't have the position dialed in, you can't just expect the head coach to just get a free pass until they take a swing on the quarterback. So I think it's very possible that a lot of what's happening is the league looks at this job as completely unattractive. When I say this job, I mean DC. And that coaches will be difficult to get to convince to come over here. And you're going to find retreads, and you're going to find people who are just taking a job because they don't have another opportunity. And I think Woody, absolutely, it's a real possibility that he's decided to put his foot down and say, you're not spending any more of my money. I already spent a ton of money on you. Go figure it out yourself, and show improvement. I mean, I think it's very, very possible. And with that type of mandate, I think it's very, very possible and probable that the Jets are going to take some kind of a swing at quarterback. I don't know what that looks like yet. I do think there's a real chance they go after Mendoza. But if not Mendoza, I would not put it past Woody and this group to try to find and spend money on a big vet name to try to change the narrative. But if they If they burn draft capital for 2027 and doing it, I'll be pissed. Like I'll feel differently if it's for Mendoza. Now, if you give up 2 first-round picks from 2027, you do a pick swap this year and a second rounder this year, I would say you're crazy. You overpaid. If a move for Mendoza is pick swap first and second, your 16th or 33rd pick this year, and a second next year, or one of your firsts, maybe the Dallas first next year, I'm not so upset. There's going to be fans that think that's a complete overpay. It'll be an overpay, except if Mendoza is the franchise quarterback. You will still have plenty of draft capital. You will still have plenty of cap room to pick up free agents. So I think that there's a world where they make that kind of move, and it might be the only move that can save his job at this point. I don't like being negative. I want to wait to see what the actual moves are. But as I sit here today on Tuesday, looking at the landscape of the Jets and trying to read the tea leaves on what's happening in general, and it's not easy because the Jets aren't putting anything out there right now. This comes across as a team in chaos. It comes across as a team that's looked upon very poorly amongst the league. And I have a hard time believing anybody we bring in here, aside from guys like Frank Reich, who have a resume but don't have opportunities maybe. This just feels like a lame duck head coach and staff that's hoping for the Hail Mary. That's what it feels like. Now, the last thing I'll say on this, because it's a very big point of consternation amongst the fan base. Everybody's saying that, well, if this was the case, they should have just fired him. I actually don't agree with that statement, which is crazy to say. I'd rather sit through another awful season with him as head coach this year, or get lucky that he has a good year, versus firing him at the end of this year. There were 10 job openings. Where would the Jets sit in that world? They'd sit with the Cleveland Browns. They'd sit with the Arizona Cardinals. They would. And by the way, Arizona has a quarterback that the Jets are potentially trying to get, which is crazy. And we look at the Cardinals' job as a shit job. The Jets have no path to a QB1 right now. They won 3 games. The job is not attractive. The Browns' job is not attractive, clearly. How many guys have bowed out of the job? So if you were one of 11 openings this cycle, some people are like, well, you could go get Sean McDermott. Like, it doesn't work. It actually doesn't work that way. Like, they have to want to interview. They have to want the job. If the Jets are a dumpster fire this year and don't burn draft capital for 2027 and have the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick, and there's 7 quarterbacks in the draft, and you've got $100+ million in cap room to work with, and there won't be 11 job openings or 10 job openings, there's 5 or 4, you might be the most attractive job on the market at that point. Guys like Clint Kubiak, who might not take a job this year, could potentially be there. Sean McDermott, who people have brought up, is likely looking to take a year off, would potentially be there. Mike Tomlin might be there. Other hot offensive coordinator candidates or DC candidates that people like will potentially be there. It won't have the stigma of a one and done. They would have given Glenn 2 years and fail. You would get a 4-year or a 5-year contract as the new head coach. Who knows? Maybe Muji even gets to pick the coach. And guess what? Muji is from the Denver coaching tree, and he has ties to a lot of, interesting candidates and names moving forward. I'm okay with Glenn staying in the job this year. Doesn't mean I won't be critical and positive when there's opportunity to be positive. It's just today, as I sit here right now, all I'm looking at is another 3-win, 4-win season and a coaching search that kicks off at the end of the year. That's what I'm looking at today. Will it change? Maybe. If you're a pro Aaron Glenn person and you think this is all normal, it's not. Don't reference Dan Campbell either as this being normal. Like, we try to use Dan Campbell for every example that makes Aaron Glenn a possible success. Like, I get that he had this great turnaround in Detroit. He hit on a young coordinator with Ben Johnson. Okay. Aaron Glenn did not get fired after year one. He kept him in the role and allowed him to improve. Dan Campbell is an outlier amongst multiple failed head coaches over the years that had a year like Aaron Glenn had last year. So if you're hoping for the outlier, fine, but that's hoping. Don't call this normal. Don't say this is a plan. He's literally trying to pick through the weeds as he goes right now to come up with what he's going to do in 2026. That's how it feels. I could be wrong. I'll be the first one to say it if he figures it all out and we hit on the quarterback and all these great things. Listen, another good thing that could happen, and you may think this is crazy, but let's say they do take a swing and get Mendoza and the season's still a disaster. You could have a Jackson Dart situation where the job is still very, very attractive because you've got your franchise quarterback. Like if you drafted Mendoza and he looked really good, but the team sucked. Why is that different than the Giants with Harbaugh? This job will be attractive for one of two reasons next year: a path to a franchise quarterback or having a franchise quarterback. It is not an attractive job as we sit here today. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you guys have an awesome Tuesday. I'll pop on with anything if there's any announcements with coaches or changes that come up. And you know, who knows? It may actually happen after this video is posted, as it'll be posted on Tuesday evening. So thanks for tuning in. Please click like and subscribe. We're over 1,000 subscribers. Thank you guys for all the support. Talk to you soon. Have a great day.